It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you're listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Some updates in my personal life. For those who listen regularly, know about the SEC examination. I haven't heard from them for a while. I hope I get through Christmas and the New Year without hearing from them, but I'm sure I will at some point, hopefully after January 1st, and hopefully it will be fantastic news because I haven't heard from them in a while, so fingers crossed on that. Pool temperature update, right? You guys love this. Well, a few people do. Most people probably find it pretty annoying, but I finally had to relent and buy a heat pump, a full-size heat pump. I had a little portable one. Still have it, by the way. But it's 12,000 BTUs, and my calculations were under normal conditions, it can add about a degree of temperature to the pool per day. So it requires me to have two pool covers and turn it on and turn it off and keep an eye on it and all that stuff. Well, the new heat pump is not only more efficient, but considerably more powerful. So it is around 48 to 50,000 BTUs. So if my 12,000 calculation is correct, instead of adding 1 degree in a day, this can add 4. And so I can just keep the pool at a reasonable temperature for the winter for probably about $3 a day, I'm hoping. And it's only that cheap because I still have the rooftop panels, and somewhere around middle of March, they'll kick in and be effective enough that I can go back to not really using the heat pump for 8 to 9 months. But I want to be able to use it in the winter, and this makes it a lot easier. So I'm out a few bucks to make something a lot easier. And before I do my next little thing about EV cars, which is what I'm going to talk about, I want to point out that we have an interview today with Abby Hafer. She's going to talk about creationism and why it's silly, stupid. I think it's stupid. I don't want to put too many negative words in her mouth because we're going to talk about her book and the new audiobook that's coming out. So that's going to be later on. We're going to talk about Cusion volatility and granularity and clarity, some of my favorite words, and how that works and how you can have it work for you. And then I have a segment that I'm going to call long-term stocks versus bonds, inspired by a listener's email. And I'm not doing to them, but to the things that they linked and shared that they read that they thought was interesting. And it is interesting, but it's either meaningless, worthless, wrong, or so blatantly obviously true that it's duh. So you might like that. Who knows? If you find any other articles that are written about investing that you think just aren't hitting the mark, let me know. Maybe I can do a commentary about it. And of course, I'm still looking for church money. If you happen to have to go or compelled to go to a church for some reason, for holidays or maybe a wedding or unfortunately maybe a funeral, look around. There might be a table with papers on it because some churches make it publicly available, at least available to other members to pick up and know what's going on. And you can too. And you scan that in and send it to me, and we'll find out how much that church gives actually to charity. I had an email from someone that was upset, I guess. I'm glad they're listening to the show, but they were upset because they were certain that their church gives like half. That is, half of all the money brought in by donation goes to helping people in need and poverty. And I said, that is great to hear. Send me some documents, budget, P&L, whatever, cash flow, and I'll take a look at it. And you won't be surprised they sent me nothing. So I'm asking everybody, if you happened across a church budget or spending or income documents, let me know. Send it to me. EVs, electric cars, electric vehicles. This specifically is going to be in reference to Tesla superchargers. And I am not an expert on Tesla superchargers, but I've watched some experts. I've watched some videos. I've read some stories. So I think I have this correct. But if you know something different, I am open for you telling me, and I will make adjustments, tweaks, corrections, whatever applies. So Tesla chargers, there's two main types. There's the destination charger, which falls in the category of level 2. It's moderate charging. It can add 25 to 35 miles an hour. You can often plug it in at your home. You might need a special outlet, either a 30 or 50 amp or bigger outlet, or hardwire it into your breaker panel for your house. Level 2, you can get those that are not Tesla versions. I happen to have a charge point one. Not really the subject for today's conversation. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear. I'm not talking about level 1's just your regular wall outlet. Level 2, charging, which you can do at home or at malls. And often they're very affordable or free, but they take a while. Hours and hours and hours to charge your car. I'm going to talk about DC fast charging. So, of course, the important words, DC, direct current. So the unit does not deliver AC to your car like you might have from your house. It delivers DC power. And the batteries are DC power, direct current power. So that's kind of nice. And the fast part, of course, is fast. Generally speaking, the lowest I've ever seen anything be considered a DC fast charger is 24 kilowatt. That's the rate at which the energy flows into the vehicle. Most DC fast chargers are 50 or higher, up to 350 or more. And of course, it all depends on what your car can take. The car that I used to have, which I adored, and is absolutely fabulous for around town and even pretty good to go long distances, it just takes time to charge it. That was the Chevrolet Bolt EV. For long distance driving, it worked out to something about every 90 minutes of driving, you would have to stop and charge for about 30 minutes. So it adds, a third more to your travel time. So if you have a 6-hour trip, it's now an 8-hour trip. Not a deal breaker for a lot of people, but you know what? Modestly inconvenient. The chargers are more and more locations, and that's just going to get better. But you still have the charging time that you can't really avoid with something like that. My Ioniq 6, as a reference, can charge at 240 kilowatt, not the 55 that the Bolt could charge. We're talking about 240, which is 4 times faster. And since the Ioniq 6 holds the charging rate much further along in filling up the battery, you might even say it's 5 to 6 times faster than charging a Chevy Bolt. Really big difference. Matter of fact, my calculations with only some highway driving is that you can drive up to 3 hours and charge in 15 minutes, maybe 20. Of course, if the charger doesn't charge as fast, it may take longer. These are the downsides of this. But most of the drives are local. So if you have a place where you can plug in your car, if you have more than one car, you can get an EV now and you're going to be fine. Where it could become a problem, of course, is if you don't have the funds to buy a newer car, or you're in some kind of apartment complex or high rise where you just don't have access to charging. An EV still totally doable, but it's harder, to be fair, for now as the infrastructure gets built out. And one of the things that's come along recently in the last year, and we're talking in 2023, multiple large auto manufacturers from around the world have agreed to use the Tesla Connection Standard, which is called NACS, North American Charging Standard. Very clever name from the people at Tesla. Again, they do a lot of great marketing things. Absolutely. Props on that. Those outlets, that shape will be put in almost all cars, all EVs going forward in the United States, starting in mid or late 24, into 25, and probably by 26 or 27, all new cars will have that form factor, that size and shape, the Tesla connector. Keep in mind that many years ago, Tesla adopted the protocol that CCS uses. And that would allow modern Teslas, maybe not the first several years, but most Teslas can pull up to a Tesla charger and charge, or they can pull up to a non-Tesla charger. Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint are the three biggest, and plug in with only a physical adapter to adjust for the size and shape of the connection. So Tesla drivers had this ability where they could charge almost anywhere, which is pretty cool, to be fair, for Tesla drivers. Well, the U.S. government passed a law that in part offers up $7.5 billion to companies to help build out the charging infrastructure. But your charging towers have to be basically usable by everybody. Tesla chargers were not, and still aren't, usable by everybody. But they've been making these deals and agreeing to open up their charging network so that they can get a piece of that action. Maybe even a couple of billion of dollars to put out even more Tesla charging stations, which is fine because everyone will be able to use them. It allows me to have more places to charge. Talking specifically about Tesla superchargers, not the level 2 destination charger I mentioned a few minutes ago. So when you charge the car, the rate at which the energy transfers into your car is measured in kilowatts. And kilowatts is a combination, a multiplication factor of volts and amps put out by the equipment that goes into your car. Every car made by every different manufacturer has slightly different physical and electrical architecture inside. And this is one of the reasons why the reliability of non-Tesla chargers is not as high as Tesla chargers. I think it's often overblown dramatically in the media. But to be fair, it's not as good as Tesla, but it's pretty good. It works almost all the time that I've been to one. But I know people that have shown up at chargers and they don't work. So it's a real problem, but it's not crazy big problem. But if you can now charge your car at a Tesla supercharger, in addition to all the chargers you already have available to you, all of the towers, that's pretty cool. And because Tesla cars can use the protocol for the old Tesla standards and the new standard which Tesla uses, which is the CCS protocol for communication between the cars, that's why Tesla cars can stop and charge at non-Tesla stations. It also means that the V3, at least the version 3 superchargers, they might use both Tesla and the CCS protocol, but it makes it really easy for your car to hook up once Tesla opens the network and to charge it at a Tesla supercharger, even if you're not driving a Tesla. To the best of my knowledge, version 1 and version 2 superchargers will not be available to non-Tesla drivers. It just doesn't have the proper software or equipment. It's just not going to work. V3, which currently has over 12,000 charging towers within the United States, will be available to people that drive non-Teslas somewhere in 24 or 25 or 26, which is pretty cool. Tesla is working on, and I think they've started to roll out V4, version 4 superchargers, which are even more powerful. However, there are little problems that exist depending on the car that you drive. One of the reasons non-Tesla chargers are less reliable is that different cars have different wants and needs as far as electricity. In the Tesla universe, you can control everything as the manufacturer. You make the charging tower, you make the cable, at least you spec it out, you make the cars, and so everything does everything the same one way. And it's easy. It's a lot easier, and it's cheaper to put in towers because they're all the same, which is pretty cool. Again, credit to Tesla. However, it comes into a situation where virtually all current Teslas use what's called a 400-volt architecture. It may actually be slightly higher than that, but that's what the industry calls it, 400-volt architecture. Many manufacturers, Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, Porsche, Volkswagen, several others, Lucid, Rivian, they're all either using or going to 800 volt architecture. And so to get a rate of flow of electricity, of energy, as measured in kilowatts, if you increase the volts, you can decrease the amps. Or you can increase the volts and leave the amps alone and charge twice as fast. Which is why the car that I drive, the Ioniq 6, while it doesn't peak at 250 like Teslas do, only for a short period of time, by the way, it can do 240 for a much longer period of time. And so the net overall effect is the Ioniq 6 going from 10% to 80% can charge materially faster than any Tesla that's out there. Of course, there might be exceptions that I don't know about. But so that's pretty cool. And when the Ioniq 6 or a lot of other cars that are not Teslas pull up to a DC fast charger and you plug it in, the charging tower and your car have a chat and they exchange data and information, and the equipment that is non-Tesla charging towers has much more flexibility, aka much more cost. It can handle a wide range of voltages and amperages to match what your car needs. That makes the equipment more complicated, more flexible, but more complicated and more expensive. And the more complicated it is, you slightly increase the risk that it doesn't work at a small incremental percentage of the time. But you can charge any car at a modern Electrify America tower, an EV tower, charge point towers, and you can get pretty much whatever the car can take, especially at a 350 kilowatt charging tower. Almost no car can charge beyond that today, but that will change in the future. So you can actually charge your car considerably faster at a non-Tesla station. The Tesla towers are rated to max out at 250 kilowatt. But if you use a non-Tesla car, you're probably not going to get that. And it comes mostly from a mismatch in the amps and the volts. So a Tesla supercharger V3 is perfectly matched to give the proper volts and the proper amps to a Tesla car to get really close to that 250 kilowatt. But if the car you bring and plug it in can't use those exact specs, if your voltage is a little higher, well, then maybe the amperage is a little lower. And when you multiply the two, you don't get anywhere near 250. You end up with maybe 150. And currently it seems like version 3 superchargers, some of them, a very, very, very small percentage, I think it's less than 100 towers currently, maybe 150, have what's called a magic dock. Again, Tesla, clever, very good name, the magic dock, where once you tell Tesla through the app what car you're going to charge, it has a different end on the cable. That's the magic dock, and you can just plug it into your car. Theoretically, you might be able to charge your car up to 150 kilowatt. To date, no one's been able to do this. And no one knows why. Well, maybe someone knows why, but I don't know why. And it might be something in the Tesla protocols where they're not allowing that to happen. So the fastest any car has charged on Tesla superchargers version 3 that aren't Tesla cars is around 75 kilowatt. Even if your car could theoretically take 250, it only gets 75. Now, for cars that use 800 volt architecture, the problem is worse, because if you can't get the full voltage, the amount of electricity, the amount of kilowatt, the amount of flow of energy that you can get can be dramatically reduced. If the voltage is 400, like it is from a Tesla tower, many of these 800 volt cars have additional equipment inside that's called a DC to DC converter, and it changes that 400 volt electricity up to 800 volts to put it into the car. Well, that cuts the kilowatt essentially in half, and or the hardware is limited in such a way that it can only pass through 50 kilowatt rate of flow. So because of confounding stacking problems, a car that can get 250, 270, 300 kilowatt from a Electrify America EVgo charge point tower. When you take that to a Tesla tower, a V3 Tesla supercharger, you're probably going to be limited to around 50. Now that's a problem, because now that means instead of every 3 hours charging for 15 minutes, that means you drive 3 hours and you charge for an hour and 15. I expect this will be finished or corrected, improved, modified as we go forward, particularly with the rollout of the V4 superchargers. But for now, it's something you need to know as a non-Tesla driver, that you will soon, within a year or two, have an additional 12,000 towers all over the United States, probably even in Canada, that you can stop at and charge your car on a DC fast charger, the Tesla superchargers version 3. But you might be limited to 50 kilowatts. So it doesn't become your primary location to stop, because you don't want to be there for long. So you have to use some other charger. But if the local charger is not working or it's full and there's a Tesla supercharger nearby, that could be a lifesaver. It saves your trip, your vacation, your plan, whatever. So I'm delighted to have those become available to everybody, including myself. There are some cars, and the Ioniq and the Kia and Genesis brand, which is all owned by the same company, they have a neat little trick that I just learned about, and I hope the hell this is right. They don't have a DC to DC converter to help give you that 50 kilowatt rate of flow from a Tesla supercharger. What it does instead is it sends that new inbound electricity to the drive motors of the car. And those drive motors can push the wheels, and they can recapture the energy up to a certain amount when you're slowing down the car, like regenerative braking, or slowing down, or braking when you're going down a hill. You know, when it puts the energy back into the battery, that's where it comes from. So the guys at Hyundai figured out how to do that with new inbound electricity that now goes to those motors, and the car treats it as if you were braking the car and can put 100 kilowatt as a rate of flow into the battery. So that's a big perk for certain models of cars, and big perk for me that I thought I was only going to get 50 to 60 on a V3 supercharger, and I've not yet done this, but at least theoretically, there's nothing in the car limiting it below 100 kilowatts. So I would still prefer 200 plus, 240 in my car. But again, if the towers are full or not working, I can drive over to a Tesla supercharger version 3. Right now, it has to have a magic dock, but in a year, it might be most of the version 3 superchargers, and I can charge at 100 kilowatt. And eventually, as they swap out equipment and upgrade it, I won't be limited to 100. I might get 150. I might get 180. And one would imagine eventually I will be able to get whatever the car wants from a Tesla supercharger. But it appears that in the current time, the most I'll get is 100, and many other people will get only 50. If your car has the exact right equipment and only runs on a 400 volt architecture, right now you're still limited theoretically to 150, although the videos that I've watched, no one's yet done it. So we'll see. There's some throttling going on, and it might be by Tesla's choice that they can only give you so much because it's not an exact match with the Tesla vehicle. So I know it seems so complicated if you've never driven a battery-powered car, an electric car, but you get used to it, just like you got used to pulling in and pumping gas. You got used to the occasional times where gas gets on your hand and you smell like gas for several hours. Which, of course, if you were used to electric cars and someone told you you had to pull in and put in a combustible liquid that may spill on your feet or your hands and you're going to smell like gasoline, no one would do that. But we're used to that. That's how it used to work. That's how it still works for most people. But the electric cars are getting better. There's many more stations being opened up all the time. Hopefully, within the next year, 12,000 V3 Tesla supercharging towers will become available to non-Tesla drivers. And all of the other companies are adding towers as fast as they can. So it's going to be a fantastic and bright future for electric cars as we go forward. It's about time to take a little break. and have the stuff that's coming up. And I think this show, it could get pretty close to 2 hours long. So sit back and enjoy. And this is middle to late December of 2023. I will not be putting out an episode around Christmas or even the days after Christmas. The next one will be in January. So it's going to be a good solid 2 weeks before the next episode. And that's all planned. So don't worry about it. Enjoy your holidays. Enjoy spending time with family and relatives the best that you can. And enjoy this little break, and we'll get on with the rest of the show.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. I just wanted to take a minute and talk about kind of a follow-up from a previous segment on volatility, on what the cushion is and how does it work. Well, I can't do English. So the important thing is that there's many ways to invest, and I have a certain things that I like and don't like. One of the things that I like, a couple words I'm going to throw out here, granularity and clarity. And I was recently talking to somebody that had a target date fund from Vanguard. Not a problem. Target date funds have a place, and sometimes in your investment portfolio, depending on the options you have, it might be the best choice for you. I often will say that there's things that you can do that are likely better, and that can often get misinterpreted as target date funds bad. I think they're suboptimal. If you have other choices, depending on your situation, it might be the best choice available to you. So that aside, I'm going to oversimplify a scenario for you and kind of refresh how the cushion works for someone that's close to or in retirement. Actually, let's say you're in retirement, whether you just started this week or you've been doing it for 10 years. Congratulations on that for you. I'm also going to use $1 million portfolio just to make the math easier. Your portfolio might be much smaller and it might be much bigger. And if it is much bigger and you need an advisor, give me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Anyway, so $1 million. And let's say you're in a target date fund. And I'm going to oversimplify them because most target date funds will have total bond, total international bond, U.S. stock, international stock, and maybe a couple other categories, or they might actually be buying actual things. But the result that you get is one big lump. So again, I want to make this oversimplified just to make the point. If you have a year where I'd say a year has passed and you're getting ready to refill your cash or start taking more money out for your monthly budgeting needs. Your $1 million, and again, oversimplification, half in stocks, theoretically making 10% per year on average in the long run, but in the short term, anything can happen, and half in bonds. And let's say we're in a bond environment like right now where you're making 4%. Probably making a little bit more than that right now, but again, oversimplification for the purposes of this discussion. In a theoretical average year, and no year is ever that theoretical average year, you make 10% in stocks and 4% in bonds. Your average 10 plus 4 divided by 2 is about 7%. Cracking. That's fantastic. If you have a down year where the stock market falls, again, oversimplification by, let's say, 50%, and the bonds still have yields of 4%. Okay, so half of your money lost 50%, and half of your money made 4%. So minus 50 plus 4 is minus 46. Your return is minus 23. Wow, minus 23 sucks. No doubt about that in this extremely negative scenario. But half of your money was in bonds that made 4%. However, because you are in some kind of managed fund, you don't get to enjoy the granularity. You can't see. You don't have the clarity of what's being invested in. At the end of the year, your portfolio is down 23%. Absolutely fantastic from a numeral sense because you're down 23, not 50. Awesome. But now you want to take out some money. Well, where do you take it from? You take it from the one and only investment you have, a target date fund. You are removing money that is down 23%. And they are probably going to remove it equally from all of the sub-investments that they have. So the part that's bonds, you make a little bit. The part that's stocks, you lose a whole bunch. You lose 23%. And the part that's down never has a chance to recover because you sold it and spent it. That is a problem. And that is one of the reasons that often the calculations that people come up with say you cannot take out more than 4%, which is a rule I follow for anyone who's under 62, just to be extra cautious. And if you, I've had sometimes people come to go, I can't make it on 4%. I need a little bit more. Well, then you're not ready to retire. I mean, if you have to, you have to. But if you have a choice, keep working, work a few more years, save some more money. But if you are in a series of different index funds with different ups and downs and different investments, and let's just, again, make this wickedly simple. You own on your own half of your money in the total U.S. stock market, which is down 50%, and half in the total bond market that maybe is up 4%. And again, all theoretical, just for getting to this end point here. You made or lost the same money as you would have in that target date fund. You lost 50% in the stocks, you made 4% in the bonds. But here's the magical trick. When it's time to take out cash and you need to get more cash, you sell the bonds and you leave the stocks alone. A target date fund does not allow you to do that. You do not have the granularity and you can't see with clarity what you own because you own one thing. Now, in this case, oversimplified as it is, you see two things. Part of your portfolio fell 50%, part of your portfolio went up 4%. Well, you start selling the things that went up 4%. Additionally, of course, the bond or the stocks have issued some dividends, which may or may not be equal to what they were the previous year. Done segments on that in the past. It doesn't fall anywhere near as fast as you think it might, but it can go down in rough economic times. But that's okay. You get whatever dividends you get from the stocks, you get whatever yield or dividends you get from the bonds. If you still need to sell something or you still need more cash flow, you sell the bonds, right? Easy. Because what has happened every single time in the past? This may not happen in the future. I don't know the future. So keep this in mind. I'm going with the best information available to me. Every single time the stock market has fallen a lot, at least in the United States, so far, it comes back. Now, it may take a few years. The question is, how many years? Well, when you include capital appreciation and dividends, last time I checked, the longest time it ever took the stock market, as again measured by the S&P 500 or its surrogates before 1970s, 7 years is the longest it took. Even 1929, the complete market collapse and the depression, you'll often hear that it took 22 years for the stock market to come back. If you look only at the price of the shares, it did. But a lot of those companies paid huge dividends because they had cash and because they wanted people to buy them. So the actual time it took to return back, if you had reinvested the dividends, is something around 7 years. So it kind of depends on how you look at it. So you want to have enough money in the cushion that you can sell that money for years and years and years while you wait for the stock market to come back. The closest time we had to 7 years not really working was 2000 to 2007. The market as a whole, not the NASDAQ, by the way, but the market as a whole recovered in that 7 year time period or less. But in 2008, there was a big drop again. So now there's a stress test to the concept, which is why, at least originally, I was saying you should have in the cushion enough money to cover you for 10 to 12 years. So when I design cushion for somebody, it's not based on a percentage like the oversimplified 50-50 that we were talking about. I'm trying to get a point where there's enough money in bonds, enough dividends from bonds, and enough dividends from stocks that you can avoid selling stocks for X number of years. Someone who is pretty aggressive, that number might be as low as 10. Like I said, 10 to 12 was my baseline. Currently, I'm recommending 12 to 14. So even in that case where 2000 into 2007, you could have started rebalancing in 2004, 5, 6, 7. Maybe you hadn't still fully recovered because you're taking money out. By 7, you get hit again. So 7 years is probably not enough. 10 years or 12 years on the lower bound of the now 12 to 14 is enough, particularly if you're a little more willing to take risks, you're more open to volatility, and especially if you have the ability to decrease the amount of money you're taking out. Maybe your portfolio is 20 or 30% of everything you need in retirement because you have a pension, which probably is unlikely. Maybe you have Social Security. Maybe you have a rental property. Maybe you have some other thing. Maybe you have a pension from a different company. You have to take a look at all those things. Or maybe the 4 or 5% that you're taking out, you don't really need to take it out. So if you have $1 million portfolio and you're taking out 5% or 50,000, if things go bad for a year or two, maybe you could reduce that to 40 or to 30. If you have that flexibility, you can take more risk. If you don't have that flexibility, then maybe your cushion should be a little bigger. And like I said, I've got a nice fancy spreadsheet that calculates all this, and it shows out into time how many years you can go before you have to sell stocks. So if the market falls 20, 40, 50% or some other obscene number like that in a 1 year or 2 or 3 year time frame, if you have a properly designed portfolio, it's not going to break you. It may still make you cry because as much as I know, when, as an example, when 2020, when COVID started hitting and in March of 2020 and the market went down something like 30, 35%, and you open up your statement at the end of the next quarter, and the number that you saw last time was a lot bigger. The number you see this time is a lot smaller. That's brutal. I don't tell people to not be upset. I don't tell people to not be sad. Be upset, be sad, be frustrated, cry if you have to, but don't panic. Don't panic. That's not the time to sell. When the market comes back up, assuming that it does, and it may not, then you might ask yourself, even though I can have X% in the stock market, do I want to? And you can adjust your portfolio, but don't do it while you're down. So anyway, longer than I think I wanted again. It's all my segments. I just really, really enjoy thinking about this, talking about this, helping people understand it. But that was a little bit of the psychology and the purposes of having a cushion, of having the granularity, having the clarity. Of course, often when I make plans for people, it's much more robust than that. There might be 6 or 8 different bond index funds. There's usually 6 U.S. stock index funds, perhaps a real estate index fund, and then maybe another 6 international funds. So you can have even more granularity. You can overdo it too, but the more granularity, you can then look and have a year where, like say earlier this year, when U.S. large cap growth stocks were up 30, 40% for a period, if you need to create some more cash because you're in retirement, what a great time to sell $10 or $20 or $30,000 out of that fund, depending on how big your portfolio is. If at some point that fund is down 30%, don't sell from there. Maybe a different stock fund is up. Maybe bond funds are your best bet. So the more granularity to a point that you have, the more likely you can sell things that are up as you need them. Wait for the things that are down to come back up. And I think the data shows, I have to look for this. I know it was in Common Sense on Mutual Funds by John Bogle. This not only reduces your volatility, but it helps your long-term performance because you're not selling things that are down. Anywho, let's take a quick break and get on with the rest of the show.
My mum only lied to me about one thing. She said there was a God, and but that's because when you're a working class mum, Jesus is like an unpaid babysitter. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of like, she wants you to be good. You know, the best of working class mum where I grew up she wasn't hoping I'd be a doctor or a lawyer. She hoped I wouldn't be stabbed to death in a barroom fight, you know. So the best thing to do is, well, if he's God-fearing, then he'll be good. It's a good rule of thumb because, you know, I went to Sunday school from about the age of 4 till 8. There was just great teachings of Jesus. I love Jesus. He was my superhero. He really was. God was magic, right? But Jesus was just a man. And what I loved about Jesus was he was kind. And he was brave, and I thought he was amazing. And I thought he was brilliant, like just a brilliant guy, you know. So I was about 8, and my brother must have been 19. He came in once, and I was doing something from the Bible, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, drawing Jesus." And he went, "Who was Jesus?" And I said, "Well, he was the Son of God." He went, "Why do you believe in God?" Right? And my mum went, "Bob, shut up." And I knew she had something to hide. And he was telling the truth. And I knew from body language. And then I worked it out, and I was an atheist in an hour.
In an hour?
Yeah.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. From time to time, I get lovely emails, and this is an example of something shared with me by a listener in an email. And I want to make perfectly clear, I don't have a problem with the person that sent this or the wonderful email that they sent it to me in. My problem is with the article. So you'll understand in a minute. But I wanted to make sure that the person that sent this, who was a listener, understands it's not about you. But the article kind of pissed me off a little bit, rubbed me the wrong way, agitated me, made me feel compelled to do what I'm going to do here, which is this rant about this article. Apparently, there's some new research. So there's that. And this was written up in Bloomberg, and the person that sent the email didn't have access to the full article. And apparently, neither do I. I can see a teaser for it. But then in this thing called fa-mag.com, Financial Advisor Magazine, apparently fa-mag.com, there is the article, and it says, thanks to Bloomberg for the article, but it's not exactly the same. So I'm not necessarily critiquing the Bloomberg article because I couldn't read it, but I am going to critique the fa-mag.com story written by Lou Wang or modified by Lou. I don't know how much this is modified from the original article because it kind of reads as if it's the Bloomberg article, but it's different than the part of the Bloomberg article that I can see as the teaser, and which is written by a different person. So I'm not sure how you can give byline to somebody if they haven't written something. And like I said, there's parts that are different. Okay. So all of that being out of the way, my summary review is that this article at fa-mag.com is written in the style of a high school student attempting to write a paper, but make it hard to find that they plagiarized the entire fucking paper. Oh, and by the way, they have no idea what they're talking about. Let me give you an example. I'm going to give you a bunch of them. The very first line, I think this is all one sentence. Yeah. Quote, after the beating they took in bonds over the last 2 years, investors can be forgiven for wondering if it was ever a good idea to rely on fixed income to lay up for old age, end quote. All right, Now, the first thing I will admit my potential ignorance, I'm assuming that the layup somehow is basketball reference for an easy score of points. So maybe I don't understand its context in there. Ironically, the teaser for the original article doesn't have that phraseology in it. So again, rewritten, modified words are changed around in a way that may have made the original article appear even stupider. So there is that thing. So I'm just going to break this apart like I often do. And maybe this is not the way to look at it. This might be a Phil problem. I get it. But I represent me. So I'm going to talk about my thoughts. So it says, after the beating they took in bonds over the last 2 years, this has come up multiple times where people, I've done segments on this already, where people talk to me about ways to avoid market losses without being in bonds because bonds have done terrible, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, bonds as a whole, as measured by the total bond market index over the last 2 or 3 years, are down something like 10%. If you look at just long-term U.S. Treasuries, 20-year duration, 20-year term bonds, it is as much of a loss as 30% over the last 2 years. However, short-term bonds, U.S. government bonds, are down about 2%, and probably short-term corporate bonds, I didn't look it up, but I'm guessing that they're about even, maybe up 1% or so over the last 2 years. So if you had a whole bunch of your retirement portfolio in really aggressive high-interest bonds, really aggressive long-term bonds, to try to eke out an extra half to a full percent of return because you didn't want the 1 to 1.5% that you could get in short term, you took a giant fucking risk and you lost. You lost a lot. But that's only because you, if you're in this unfortunate situation, or maybe more importantly, your advisor didn't understand, and probably still doesn't understand, how bonds fucking work. And when U.S. interest rates are at historic all-time ever lowest rates, and the overnight lending rate from the Fed was effectively between 0 and 0.25%, my analysis, my thoughts on it was that the U.S. Federal Reserve would never go to negative interest rates because people, Americans, are stupid with math. Other countries did go to negative rates, but the U.S. would never go to negative rates because people would freak the fuck out. So we were at the bottom, right? So there's nowhere to go lower with interest rates. Interest rates can only go up. And when interest rates go up, bond values, the existing bonds that are already out there, their values go down. And the values go down in relationship to a number that's called duration. It's a mathematical calculation that shows you how much the principal value of those bonds will go down if interest rates go up. It's really easy to find. For specific bonds, it's harder, but for bond funds, it's really easy. It's everywhere. Morningstar or whatever company put out this bond fund, they will have, or they should provide to you, make it easy for you to see the duration number. With that knowledge, and for several years before this all happened, and I was too early, I will own that, but I was deathly afraid of big losses or loss potentials in bonds, which is why 70, 75, 80% of bonds I was using were very short-term bonds, 1, 2, 3, maybe up to 5 years of maturity / duration to avoid this very problem. So first of all, this article is talking about people that had no idea what they were doing with bonds. Great. Okay. And then it goes into investors can be forgiven for wondering. Forgiven for wondering? Forgiven for questioning? Forgiven? Okay, whatever. If it was ever a good idea to have fixed income. Okay. 2022, 2023 was not a normal year for bonds. This was I don't know. To me, an easily forecastable potential problem that was going to happen with bonds. I didn't know when, but at some point when interest rates would be compelled to go up, bond values would go down. I don't know. Clearly, everyone else didn't see this, but to me, it seemed so trivially obvious. This is not always the case. Sometimes bonds move in the same direction as stocks. Sometimes they don't. That's one of the reasons to have bonds in retirement. Anyway, the article goes on and says, new research validates these suspicions. What suspicions? The layup? The bonds are bad? That bonds went down? I'm lost. And again, this is probably a me problem. I have trouble following sometimes when the pronouns, or even in this case, lack of pronouns. New research validates these suspicions. What are these? I don't know. So again, I get it. This could be a Phil problem. Then the rest of the article seems to wander back and forth and or not understand the difference, at least that is crystal clear in my mind, that one's portfolio in retirement should be different than when not in or near retirement. That completely seems to be lost as an option for the author of the paper. Let's see here. What else they have? Bonds. We did that. The layup thing. Yeah, that's stupid. Okay, so in retirement, the article has this line: as long as the equity investors are able to stick it out, they end up being better off with very high probabilities. Okay, high probability that somebody who's trying with a very high probability. Wait, as long as the equity investors are able to stick it out, they end up being better off with very high probability than somebody who's trying to smooth out those short-term movements by diversifying in bonds. Wow. Okay. Maybe I'm not reading that right. I'm going to be generous here and saying that if you have all stocks and you stick it out, you're better off than someone who has bonds. That's the gist of this article. And in the long run, you are. It's really clear. I've covered this dozens of times. There's lots of data. If this is being portrayed as some new information, wow, how profoundly ignorant do the researchers and or author or reauthor, the plagiarizer of this article, have to be to present as an idea, as a new idea, hey, by the way, if you're all stocks and not a mix of stocks and bonds, you will have better long-term performance. For me, this is a earth-shattering duh moment. Are you freaking kidding me? So, and of course, very, very important at the very beginning of this quote that I read, as long as the equity investors are able to stick it out. So if you're 20 or 30 or 40, your retirement is 12, 15 or more years away, as long as you're able to stick it out, as long as you're able to wait for the market to recover, yes, there is a high probability. I'll even go with the very high probability that they used that you will have a higher rate of return. Now, whether that's better or not can be defined in different ways, but you will have a higher average return on your portfolio by being 100% stocks. If you're adding money, if you leave it alone, if you can stick it out, as they say, again, maybe not a biggest fan of that phrase. That's not new. We all know that. Anyone who's listened to this show for any length of time knows that. But this is presented as new research. Wow, there's a way for you to make more money by taking more risk as long as you can stick it out. That's great. And like I said, if you're 20, 30, 40, even 50, cool. But if you're in retirement, especially if you're in retirement and you're taking money out every month because you need that, because that was your fucking plan to save a whole bunch for your whole life, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and then start pulling it out in retirement, and now you want to spend that money? How the fuck do you stick it out? How do you wait 7 or 8 years in retirement for it to all come back? And I want to point out that there are times where March of 2020, the market fell 35% in like a month or two. 2008, it fell 37%. 2000-ish, the dot-com bubble thing, more than 50%. If you waited, all of that came back. And we know that. Will it happen that way in the future? We don't know that, but based on historical norms, large market drops, sometimes that even take years to recover, but they do recover and you end up making more money if you do stick it out, if you do ride through it. But if you're in retirement taking out money, if your portfolio falls by half in a year or two, the 5% that you were taking out now becomes 10%. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that at some point you may now be taking out way too much money and your portfolio starts to shrink. And when it does recover, there's less money in there to recover because you're taking money out and you could run out. That is the perennial fear of every retiree, that they run out of money while they're still alive. So I don't know. I'm just feeling this rant. They did have one quote from an investment advisor, which was nice, that I liked. It said, "In theory, an all-stock portfolio works great. In reality, not so much." And that's what I just covered. The other thing, of course, is you have to deal with humans. And the standard model that people talk about for retirement, at least, is called the 60-40, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. I often think that that's too conservative. And I've even talked about how there are target date funds that sometimes go to 50 or even 60% bonds. I think that's way too conservative. That's me. We can have difference of opinions. I design portfolios for clients, not for you, the listener, because this is not specific investment advice. This is not personalized to you. But when I do personalize it for a client, the portfolio is designed not based on the percentage that's bonds versus stocks, although that's always trivially easy to calculate. For me, the driving factor is all about cash flow. So how long can you sell bonds? How long can you live on bond dividends, stock dividends, and selling bonds to wait for the market to recover? Because for me, I am not using bonds for the purpose of getting rid of short-term volatility. I am using them for the purpose to assure, can't even say guarantee because you never know, dramatically increase the probability that you will be able to take out the amount that you want every month until the market recovers. Let's see here. Let's go back to the article. Some other quotes. Several factors prevent advisors from grasping the advantages of an all-equity approach. Really? Prevent advisors. Now, probably the single biggest thing that I think would prevent, quote-unquote, an advisor from understanding all-equity approach is because they're paid commissions to sell something else. But that being aside, I think the vast majority of fiduciary, fee-based, fee-only advisors that are actually working for your benefit, they understand that equities, stocks, in the long run, make more than bonds. So this is another repeat of the duh. So that anyway. But I want to go into what are these factors. So I will quote again. Quote, "One of them being overconfidence in the stock bond blend born of myopic focus on the short term, the authors say," end quote. Now, I have the quotes because I'm pulling this straight from the fa-mag.com article. But it's funny when the authors of the research, but the part that's before that is not in quotes. It's written by the author of the FA article, not necessarily the original article, which I don't have access to. So I'm going to assume the original authors aren't being this melodramatic, but maybe they are. Let's see here. Being overconfident in the stock bond blend, born of myopic focus on the short term. Now, I think that if you're talking about someone having a myopic view of investing, that is a focus on the short term. So this is redundant. So is this an actual quote of what the authors of the article of the research said? Then if it is, it should have been in quotes. So it can't be that it's not in quotes and then you say the authors say. So they either said it or they didn't. If they said it, you don't need to say the authors say. You just put quotations on it. That tells the reader the authors said it. Anyway, they myopic focus on the short term. I think this article doesn't, the author of this doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm not using bonds because of a myopic focus on the short term. I'm using it because I don't have a myopic focus. I know that in the past, there have been very large market corrections. I know that if you have time, if you are adding money, that's actually can be a really good thing for you. Just imagine if you started investing in 2008 and you think it's catastrophic that your portfolio went down 37% as a young investor. But that means in 09 and 10 and 11 and 12, you got to buy stuff at a discount. It could have been one of the best things that happened to you. If you're 1 year from retirement or 1 year into retirement and your entire portfolio falls 37% and now you're taking out money, not a good thing for you, right? See, am I being clear? I don't know. Maybe if I'm beating a dead horse here, I don't know. So then the second thing is another issue. Quote, another issue is a lazy belief in the capacity of the two asset classes to balance one another, end quote. I don't know what a lazy belief is. Is that, I don't know. So giving the benefit of the doubt that you're just accepting something that is believed to be true, that the two asset classes balance out one another. Who thinks that? Maybe there are advisors that think in the long run, bonds make what stocks make. They don't. They don't balance each other. What bonds can provide is an opportunity for you to remove something or sell something that's not down while the stock market is down. Even in 2022, when the stock market was down, what was it, 20-something percent, 27%, 24%? I don't even know. If bonds were down 3 or 4%, your short-term bonds, selling something that's down 3 or 4% is way better than selling something that's down 30%. So I don't know what they mean by this lazy belief. Then there is an additional thing where they're talking about having roughly half of your stocks in international and half of your stocks domestically. And this mix of stocks beats the 60-40 stock/bond portfolio. Again, in the duh category. Just to be clear, if you have 100% of your portfolio in U.S. stocks, in the long run, last 100 plus years, that beats bonds. If you had 100% of your portfolio, and this is all from the perspective of a U.S.-based investor, if you have 100% of your portfolio in international stocks and no U.S. stocks, you beat bonds. If you have 50-50, you beat bonds. If you have 90-10, you beat bonds. If you have 10-90, you beat bonds. So it was presented that 50-50 beat bonds. 50-50 international versus U.S. domestic stocks beat bonds. To my knowledge, every single possible individual percentage ratio that you could create of U.S. versus international stocks beat bonds, period. So why point out one specific percentage and say that it beat bonds? So, yeah, I'm not in love with this article. As you probably figured out. Just something that came up, touched on a lot of things that I talk about. So if you're a regular listener, you had an opportunity, you had a chance, you maybe had the knowledge to know that at all-time record historic low interest rates in the U.S. and around the world, there was a very little upside potential on bonds and a lot of downside potential. And the things that I discussed on the show maybe helped some of you avoid some of those really big bond losses. And of course, for me, it's not specifically about balancing out per se, but the reason I have different assets, particularly in retirement, is that from time to time, things change and respond in different ways. A couple of quick examples, and this is based on the data from the end of the third quarter of 23, because I only collect this data generally once a quarter, because it is a way to resist the temptation of cherry picking dates. If you can move your beginning and ending date, you can tell almost any story with any particular investment. So I generally use only full calendar years to compare data, and or in this case, because I have it in front of me, it's very easy for me to see 1 year data, but I only do that quarterly. So this is as of September 30th. Just as a reference, in 1 year performance ending September 30th, high yield, aka junk bonds, made 9.21%. Fantastic. Now, those can lose a lot in a short period of time, but in the last 12 months, they made 9. Short-term corporate bonds made, and this is the fund VFSUX from Vanguard, made almost 4% in 12 months. Other things that in 12 months, the Vanguard Large Cap Growth Fund made 28%, but the value was only up 15%. The mid cap value was up 10%. Small cap growth was up 10.5%. Internationally, you also have variations. You have, let's see here, the International Growth Fund is up 15.7%, but the Europe Fund is up 30%. So these sometimes non-existent variations and sometimes pretty significant, like this year, like 2022, allows you the opportunity to rebalance. And you can rebalance by selling some of the winners, the bigger winners, and putting more money in the less big winners, or big losers versus little losers. You can rebalance by adding money, and when you add the money, you put it to the things that have fallen as in relationship to the percentage of your portfolio that you want them to be. You don't have to do what I like. You can make your own plan and follow it. And then it becomes a numbers thing, not an emotional thing. That's the thing I'm trying to take out of it. So if you're in retirement currently and bonds are soft or made a very little bit amount of money, if they're still in line with your portfolio, I might take out some money from the large cap growth fund. I might take some money out of international value or the international European fund, because those are the things that are up close to 30%. 30% in 12 months? Are you fucking kidding me? That's great. They're now overweighted in your portfolio because they grew so much. So that's where you take money out of. If you have a year like 2022 where virtually all stocks were down and even all bonds were down, the Vanguard Large Cap Value Fund was down 2%. Now, I don't want to take money out of anything when it's down, but when minus 2% is my best option, that's where I'm going. So anyway, rant over. I dreamed it would be under 10 minutes, but you now know that it's not. So this was some thoughts on stocks versus bonds and a juvenile attempt to explain concepts not understood by the author and or potentially the researchers who figured out that in the long run, stocks outperform bonds. Duh.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to jump right into it because it's a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show, Abby Hafer. How are you today, Abby?
I am doing just great. Thanks very much, and thanks for having me on.
It is not a problem. We are, of course, going to talk about maybe many things, because I'm flexible. But one thing we definitely want to talk about is your book that came out a couple of years ago, still temporally relevant. But the really cool thing is it's now out as an audiobook. Of course, the book is The Not So Intelligent Designer by Abby Hafer. Tell us about the book. Tell us about, well, let me ask you this. How does it become an audiobook now a couple years after it came out? How'd that work out?
Well, the way that worked out is that basically the book developed a fan base. And lots of people liked the book. And it is still available, The Not So Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not. It is still available as a paper book. And one of the people who really, really liked it is the incredible Seth Andrews, the thinking atheist, who has an excellent podcast and is very smart. And besides that, he has one of those great voices.
Indeed.
And he does quite a few audio books, including books of his own that he then turns into audiobooks. And not long ago, he offered to narrate the book, and I really couldn't think of anybody I would want more than Seth Andrews to narrate the book. And so, of course, I said yes. And it turns out to be a complicated procedure, but one that Seth knows well, which was another real advantage in having him helping me out. So he kind of knew what I should do on Audible, which is where it's available, to make it all happen and how the whole process works. And, he has a home studio, so he read the book into his end, and then I was able to access the various chapters, and they require you to listen, the actual content creator, me, has to listen to the whole thing for quality, to make sure that there are not, dogs barking in the background, but also to make sure that people read what is actually in the book and pronounce things correctly, because even the various best of readers will occasionally swap words around. And so it's very important to do the quality assurance and then write to them and say, oh, you said indelible when it was supposed to be incredible or something like that. And, slowly you go through this corrections process, and eventually you wind up with an audiobook that all parties are satisfied with, and then you submit it to Audible, and they do their own quality assurance. And at some point not long thereafter, they say, congratulations, you have an audiobook, and it's then available through Audible, and there you are. And my book became available, I guess a week or two at this point. And by book in this case, I mean the audio book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you didn't know, and maybe many of my listeners didn't know, several years ago, maybe even now many years ago, I was the part owner of an audiobook company.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So one of my dabbles, and we got an offer and sold the books that we had and the rights for future books that we had, and made a few dollars at it. But it's a tough business, and I'm assuming you can confirm that you're not going to get rich off this audiobook.
Oh, I doubt it. But as I said, in this case, the thing that's nice is that, the little book itself already has a fan base, and Seth has a fan base.
Yeah.
And, I'm hoping that it spreads through both word of mouth, but, also nice people like Phil Ferguson who have me on their podcast, and I get to talk about it.
Well, and of course, this is something that's developed because you teach design, you teach creationism, no, you teach evolution, right?
Well, I have taught evolution. I'm a biologist. I have a bachelor's degree in biology and a doctorate in zoology from Oxford University, and evolution is kind of central to everything that I do.
Yeah.
Though these days what I mostly teach is human anatomy and physiology. Hence the not-so-intelligent designer.
Who
can tell you better how bad the human body is actually designed than an anatomy professor?
Absolutely. And of course, one of your go-to ideas, which, I think if I recall the story correctly, was inspirational to the book, something you would teach students, you would go with the subject of testicles and how they're problematic. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary. And yes, this was actually an inspiration, an epiphany even, that happened during an anatomy and physiology lecture that I was giving. One of my ordinary lectures where I was lecturing about the reproductive system, and I had just drawn the male reproductive system on the board, and I was talking about how the testes, the actual sperm-producing part, have to hang outside the body in the sac of skin called the scrotum.
For humans.
And I always ask this question.
Yeah.
Which is, so why do they hang outside the body? And there's nearly always somebody who knows. And the answer is because in order to make viable sperm, the testes have to be a slightly lower body temperature than normal human body temperature. So I remember spinning around to write this on the board, and as I am writing this on the board, I'm thinking, that's really stupid.
Yeah.
Who came up with that? Having normal body temperature be incompatible with sperm production is just bad design. And at that point, I knew that I had my leading argument for bad design in the human body. And this is something I had been mulling over for a while, because the reason why evolution is still any kind of an educational issue is not because the science is unclear, but because it's a political issue, and political speech is different. Political arguments have to be short and easy to understand and easy to repeat, and I had been kind of racking my brain for what a political style argument for evolution would even look like or sound like. And so, as I said, that had been kind of mulling around in the back of my mind for ages. And so now you understand why standing there at the board was actually an epiphany, because I was thinking, yes, this is a political style argument. People will remember this one. And so that's why it became my lead argument, because, of course, once you mention men's testicles, people pay attention, and it works every time. So, as I said, that was how that all got started. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and probably one of the reasons I like the book so much, and the presentations that you've given about these subjects, is that you and I share a very similar perspective on, argumentation, presenting of information, I guess, because there are a lot of people in atheist circles that want to have philosophical debates about religion, and I don't give a shit. And I think the vast majority of people don't really know what the Kalam cosmological argument is, and those that present it were never ever convinced by it, but they don't know what else to say because they don't actually have evidence. And so I've often tried to figure out ways to argue with religious people that have nothing to do with the study of philosophy, because I think it's counterproductive. And one of the favorite things I've ever done is, if I'm arguing with a creationist, I'll give them, for the purposes of discussion, I'll grant them, you're right. Let's just for a minute, in this fantasy world that we're going to live in, you are right. Creationism is true and correct in the methodology that you present it personally, not everybody else, just you. What value does that then have to us? What can we use it for? And there's nothing. It has no value. So even if they were right, it is without meaning. It is without significance. It's without value. And they've never been granted winning the argument. So I'll grant them winning the argument and say, what do I do with that information? How does that help me cure cancer? How does that help me cure AIDS? How does that help me find the solution to COVID or the common cold? And they have nothing, because it doesn't. So I love this. So you have the testicle thing, like you said. That's the hook. That's the get 'em. And so important in this story is that that temperature mismatch. It doesn't have to even be that way. Is that correct?
That's the beauty of it. And this is kind of how I've based my writing and my public speaking around this issue, is I will then give examples in the rest of the animal kingdom showing that there are other species that got better deals. So that it's just not the case that, because, otherwise the excuse will be made, well, so sperm, God did the best he could. Sperm just have to be produced at a lower temperature, and look how cool the testes are with all these little muscles to kind of bring them closer to the body or further away depending upon the temperature needs. And it's like, that's an interesting bit of later evolution, but let's face it, there are a lot of animals, including warm-blooded animals, that have internal testes. So, it is perfectly possible to have warm body temperature and internal testes in the same animal, but we got the bad deal. So, in fact, the way I usually start is by talking about frogs, because lots of people dissect frogs in high school, and they usually remember that the testes were these little things that then had sort of big loopy connectors on the inside. And anyway, so, frogs have internal testes, which means, of course, they are much less vulnerable. But, then I move into warm-blooded animals, and I talk about elephants and rhinoceroses and armadillos, and all marine mammals have internal testes. So the point is, it's perfectly possible. And in fact, all birds have internal testes, and they usually have higher body temperatures than we do. So warm body temperatures and internal testes and creating viable sperm are all perfectly compatible. It's just that human men didn't get that particular design. And when you remember that, as I said, birds have high body temperature and internal testes, you can ask interesting questions like, well, on the other hand, the Bible says that that we're God's favor. We were made in God's image. Well, or that, God's favorite was made in God's image. So maybe God is a turkey because turkey's got a better deal than human men did. So you can kind of have fun with this. Another example that I like to give is actually rats and mice and some other animals like that have what I call convertibles, because they can have external testes if they want to reproduce, but they can also kind of tuck them up inside for convenience and extra security when they want to do that, which when you think about human men, this would mean having protected testes when you wanted them, but it would also mean control over fertility, because you could just keep your testes inside if you didn't want to reproduce. And this would actually be incredibly convenient, for family planning and contraception and all that kind of great stuff. But again, humans didn't get that deal.
Oh, we don't want that deal, probably, if we're religious, because there might be less people on the planet, so we don't want that.
Well, if we're religious, but many other people would kill for that opportunity, I think.
Absolutely. Now, I don't want to focus only on that topic, so what else is in the book? Give us an idea or two. We don't want to do all of it, of course, because we want them to buy it, but what else do you have in there? Well,
I have 10 unfortunate body parts, and I'm willing to talk about a few of them.
Yeah.
I also have 2 animals that shouldn't exist, according to intelligent design. And one thing that I remembered when I was actually, listening to the book, which was kind of fun because it's like, wow, I actually wrote a good book. That turned out nicely. Is I also do a whole lot about sort of the development and history of science denial. and sort of the politics, and I won't say the philosophy, but the showmanship and strategies around that. And as I was listening to this denialism playbook, sort of strategy, that was developed by the tobacco industry back when the link between tobacco use and cancer were new, back in like the 1950s and 1960s. The tobacco industry realized that it was kind of, in an existential crisis. And so all these different very wealthy tobacco companies came together and came up with a strategy not for refuting the evidence because they couldn't, but for denying the evidence. So that they developed this strategy, which was subsequently used by evolution denialists, which is where I kind of came across it. And it has been used since there by climate change deniers. And as I was listening to it, I was thinking, this is the same strategy that was used to deny the results of the 2020 election.
I wondered if you were going to go there, because I agree.
I am pressing it. I wrote about this in 2015. Here it is.
Yeah, it's the same process. And the sad thing is, as long as it works, people will continue to employ it.
Right. And, so one of the things that we need to do are, figure out ways in. I mean, that's what I was doing with the original book and with this audio book, is to provide people who want talking points and who, want to figure out how to deal with this. I try to offer at least some useful guideposts on that.
Yeah.
Again, you were talking earlier about philosophy and so on. What can be important is to have, the long research papers and all the stuff that people knows as a backdrop. That writing can be important. Those are like, the policy papers on a politician's website. But then you've got to be able to translate that into short things that can fit on a poster and that people can talk about when they are making ads or going door to door or this kind of thing. So, that is definitely a part of the process as well, is finding, short things to do in debates and things like that. I don't actually recommend debating science, but there are ways nonetheless of having your own presentations about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So give us another body part then.
Okay, another body part, and I have a talk that I do called Unintelligent Design that works with 5 of them. And, I start off with testes, and you see all the guys in the argument in the audience kind of crossing their legs at that point. And then I move on to the birth canal, which is also incredibly badly designed in human females. And this is something that most women can relate to. And the problem there is that we walk upright while being very smart. And these two engineering problems have sort of opposing needs, because walking on 2 legs means that you actually have to have fairly narrow hips in order to be able to walk on 2 legs. If the hips are too wide, it's just very difficult to walk. On the other hand, we are very smart. Being very smart requires large brains. Large brains require large heads. Large heads do better in wide hips, which will give you a wider birth canal. So as I said, we have these large-headed babies that would do better in wide birth canals, and we have walking upright, which is much easier with narrow hips. So it's an uneasy compromise that doesn't work very well and is very hard on some people. And in many ways, that's the hallmark of evolution, is, something that works well enough.
Right.
One of the things that I emphasize in the book is think of the contrast between intelligent design and what that implies and evolution. Intelligent design implies, designed by some intelligent being, and always by extension, by a divine all-seeing being, because that's always the way they mean it.
Yes.
So designed by the creator of the universe you'd think they'd be able to figure a few things out. On the other hand, the design specifications, or the bar, if you will, for that evolution must meet, doesn't kill people before reproduction too much of the time.
Yes, I was going to say that I often tell people that evolution only has to be good enough, and it has to be good enough that you can have offspring. And if it's a little bit better, so you can stay around for a little bit longer to help the probability of survival, and then again...
Of the offspring,
of the offspring and helping them. So there's no real benefit from an evolutionary standpoint for us to live to 100 years. Because quite honestly, from an evolutionary standpoint, once you're 15 or 20, 25 and have a couple kids and help them survive early childhood, after that, really unnecessary, and I'm lucky to have it, but from an evolutionary standpoint, not necessary.
Right, and you're lucky at that point if you live longer than that, and your kids are probably lucky too. But as I said, all it has to be is adequate up to that point.
Yeah.
And if a few people die before reproduction, so long as enough other people, do manage to be reproduced during that time, a few unlucky people dying beforehand or dying in childbirth, which happened a lot in the days before modern medicine, that evolution doesn't care. Evolution is not nice at all. And in many ways, that explains a lot of what we're stuck with a whole lot better than a benevolent creator.
Absolutely.
So I talk about the birth canal, but I'm going to go on with that because let's suppose for a moment that there was a designer and was presented with this engineering problem of we are very smart. We like having hands, so we walk upright. Now, there are two different ways that if we had actually been designed, basically starting with some design specifications, some good engineers, and a whiteboard, and they brainstormed it, what might they have come up with? Well, they might have come up with our being centaurs, or centaur, like basically six-limbed beings. 4 legs to walk on, a set of hands so that we could still do our writing and our music making and all those human things that we like to do. And at that point, we could have, big heads and be very smart. But when you have 4 legs, you have a lot more options for wider hips. So we could have been designed that way if there were an intelligent designer, or we could have been designed the way kangaroos are designed. Kangaroos are bipeds, and they have little hands and everything. They don't quite have the opposable thumbs that we have, but as I said, they have little hands, and they definitely walk upright. And in their case, they give birth to very tiny embryo-like young.
Right.
Which then emerge from the mother's birth canal at a very young age and then go into the mother's pouch on the outside of the body, which is nice and warm, and it has a nipple for nursing, and they latch onto the nipple, and that is where they continue their development. And really, that's the way to do it if you're going to be a biped. And this would be much safer for human women if it were done that way. But we didn't get that. And again, you have to ask who God likes better if kangaroos got that deal, but human women did not.
I like it. I also want to be respectful of your time, but I don't want to cut you off, of course. Is there anything else about the book or what you're working on that you want to cover before we kind of wrap up in a few minutes?
Well, would you like to hear about the denialism playbook, and then I'll have a last word about evolution?
Let's do that.
Okay. All right. I am going to go to this denialism playbook that was developed originally by the tobacco industry. So just remember that we're talking about tobacco here originally, but it has since been used by many groups, and see if this doesn't sound, unfortunately, too familiar. So the tobacco lobby's playbook, I am reading now from my own book, looked like this. 1, manufacture uncertainty. It doesn't matter how you do it. You don't need any results of your own. Just call other people's work into question. Use the word controversy when describing the opposition's scientific results. I'm hoping this sounds familiar to a lot of people.
I'm sure it does.
Two, get some spokespeople who have fancy degrees who will say anything so long as you pay them enough. This is what was done at what was then called the Tobacco Research Institute, where they hired some PhDs who would say anything. Same thing happened with the various different pressure groups that do climate change denial or evolution denial. And, of course, in the 2020 election, they had spokespeople who were senators and other Congress people and, people who worked in the White House. And, so they had some pretty good platforms as well. Now, one that was done more, as I said, for the science denial was number 3, invent an institute as a front for your lobbyists. Although, again, in the 2020 election, they didn't really need to invent an institute since they had the Senate. Number 4, pretend it's a debate. Claim that uncertainty means that both sides have equal merit. 5, repeat things that are untrue even after you have been publicly corrected. 6, portray yourself and your followers as victims. It gets people's sympathy. 7, talk about freedom. It's very important to talk about freedom, since it's a way of changing the subject and moving the conversation away from the fact that tobacco products cause cancer. Remember, this is the tobacco industry's playbook, but you can then translate to quite a few other pressure groups as well. And then finally, one that was more applicable to the tobacco group, though, as I said, with evolution, and they're wanting to have creationism taught in schools and so on. Anyway, this one still applies as well. Number 8, when possible, convince children to be your followers. The younger, the better. That's why there are all the arguments about textbooks for evolution and climate change in particular. And in a lot of Christian schools these days, they will also heavily push essentially political conservatism as a part of what the children learn. So, as I said, I'm guessing that this may sound a lot like a bunch of things you've probably been hearing for the past couple of years.
Absolutely. It sounds like a very clever strategy / playbook for someone to follow. And, of course, it follows out right with the conservative election denial. Almost everything they do is just, they don't have evidence or support, but they just throw stuff out there, just argue so that anyone can say, yeah, but the other side's just as bad.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. All righty. Did you say you had one other thing you wanted to wrap up with?
Well, I just sort of have one parting thought.
Yes, please.
So if you are ready for a parting thought, I will give you this because it's the holiday season, and it just seems like a good time to say it. So for the holiday season, my parting thought is that evolution, since we're really talking about evolution here, evolution is the greatest, indisputably true story ever told.
I like it. I like it. Well, everyone, once again, Abby Hafer, her book is The Not So Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not. It's a couple of years old, but still wonderfully relevant. It comes out with a brand new audiobook. Well, it actually came out a couple of weeks ago, read by our friend Seth Andrews, and available online and in good bookstores. Are there audio bookstores? I guess sometimes bookstores have audiobooks as well. But Abby, thank you so much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on, and happy holidays.
A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus, this award is my God now!
I do hope that you've enjoyed the show and all the content that was in it. Because it's already plenty long, I'm just going to wrap up real quickly here and maybe go get a candy cane. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Getting into the Christmas spirit. Going to do some decorating, setting up stuff in the house to make it look like a winter wonderland. So I'm going to go work on that. And I'm going to leave you in this episode. I'm going to tell you the music that's at the end of the show. It's Not Dead Yet. That's the name of the song by Ralph Covert and the Bad Examples. And it was a song that was actually covered by Styx on a more recent album. Still probably been more years than I'd like to think. But the song is called Not Dead Yet. Ralph is a friend of the show, and he's been on a couple of times to talk about music and some fun adventures that you can have going around the country in a bus and doing the rock and roll lifestyle. But that's that song, so that you know, if you're interested in it, you can go buy it probably for 99 cents or $1.29, whatever music costs these days. Once again, Not Dead Yet, written by Ralph Covert and performed by him and the Bad Examples. I look forward to seeing you out there on the road sometime soon. Until then, ciao.
Well, I was born too late to play in the Rolling Stones. I don't know Jimmy Page, I never met Yoko Ono. Standing with a strap, I'm rock and roll's bastard son. Go out, get drunk, get laid, have fun. Don't got $1 million, don't drive a Cadillac. Give me half a chance, cause I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. I've been machine gun, handgun, hijack, left for dead. Dive bomb, napalm, nuclear warheaded. Dropped from a jet plane with no parachute. Shot by a firing squad and raped by a business suit. Dancing on a landmine, one leg left. I can still crawl and I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. Well, you're bigger, rougher, meaner, tougher, dirtier and uglier and sneakier and trickier. You wanna shoot me with a gun, cut me with a knife.